Okay, on to what you really came here for today. Today our presenter has been in the IT industry for over 20 years. He joined FORSYTHE in 2002 and has led teams focused on several different areas, including networking, security, server, and storage for the Eastern United States, and has authored articles on security and topics including advanced persistent threats, cloud security, data loss prevention, effective vulnerability assessments, security, and more. Since then, he has taken over Vice President of Security Solutions. Please help me welcome David Porch.
Appreciate it. Hi there. Good morning. Hope everyone's doing well. So, thank you for having me. It's truly my honor to be here today. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I usually attend our event out there. We also have about 400 people in our group out there, and it's great just to see this many professionals in a room. So thank you for having me. Quick agenda. I think we have about, 2.5 hours. About 45 minutes to talk about a pretty interesting topic with regard to what's going on in the industry, with trying to take this very technical conversation around security and elevating it to a level that executives can understand, and also in the boardroom, so the board of directors, regardless of your industry and so forth. So that's what we're going to talk about today. This is a quick agenda. I have a couple of slides on our company, just to give you the quick commercial. We won't spend a lot of time there. We'll talk about some trends and a shift that we're seeing that's happening with metrics, with mindset, and it's that shift that makes it possible, I think, to be successful in the boardroom. We'll also talk about relationships that matter inside of the IT organization, also adapting the defenses, and then an effective program, and then we'll wrap up from there. But I want you to do me a favor today, and I want you to pretend that you're not a security professional. I want you to pretend that you're a member of a board of directors. So you're a business person, you don't really understand technology, you don't really understand security, and you're at home and you're watching the news, you're watching CNN, and you see that yet another data breach happened. And you're not really clear about why or how, but you feel like there's risk to your enterprise, so you feel like you need to kind of get under the covers and figure that out. That's really what we're going to talk about today. As I travel around the country and I talk with lots of CISOs, lots of security organizations, in a variety of industries, I find that that is the current challenge, is how do we take this conversation of risk, technical risk, and articulate it in a way that people in the boardroom can understand. So that's really what we're doing. So put your board of directors hat on for the next 45 minutes or so, and we'll go from there. So with that, this is slide 1 of 2 on the commercial about our company. So FORSYTHE is headquartered in Chicago. We were founded in 1971. So we've been around for, over 4 decades. And if you think about the history of our company, we sort of grew up with the IT industry. So if you think about how many times the industry has gone through a transformation over the last 4 decades, it's pretty substantial. So we also went through that change. So in the 70s, we're a mainframe-centric company. We moved into open systems, open storage, networking. This thing called the internet came along. I think it's just a fad, but when it came along, we decided that security was also an important part of that. So we've changed, we've evolved. We sort of view ourselves today as a very large IT systems integrator. Security is one of many things that we do. And you can see that we're a $1.1 billion firm. We have over 1,000 employees. We do lots of migrations inside of the data center. So when we think about this security problem, We know that security is usually attached to some larger, more complex IT problem that you're trying to solve. So security rarely exists just in a vacuum. You're usually trying to secure something inside of the enterprise. So we bring those multiple disciplines to the table when we do that. This is slide 2 of 2 of the commercial, and then we'll get into the content. So the security business is about a $260 million business inside of the greater integrator. Like I said, we've been around for 13 years in the security business for 13 years, so we didn't just wake up yesterday, decide it was something that we wanted to start doing. We've done 4 acquisitions in those 13 years. The latest one was about 2.5 years ago of a firm here in Texas called SOS Security. They were the 4th acquisition that we've completed. We have a product and a services business, so we have about 60 different logos on our line card from a security perspective. We sit on the advisory boards of the top 10 in that space, which means that we sit with leading executives to talk about trends, talk about what's going on inside of the business, roadmaps, and so forth. From a services perspective, when we say the word services, we're talking about professional services combined with managed services. So from a PS perspective, we execute about 300 security projects in a year. We log 60,000 hours to client work across every industry that you can imagine. And then from a managed services standpoint, we've been doing managed since 2008. We have over 100 clients in that space as well. We're one of the top security integrators in North America. If you take the security business and you unbundle it, we're a substantial player, just all alone. But we believe there's real value when you bundle it all together and you're part of the greater FORSYTHE. A bunch of certifications, and then one of the most interesting things that we have that we believe is a true competitive differentiator is we have a substantial investment in a lab. We call it a technology evaluation center, but we do a number of bake-offs, proofs of concept to help our clients sort of move the ball forward, cut to the chase in an industry that's very, very fragmented. So a lot of times, if you start with Gartner, you look at the upper right quadrant, there are a number of players in that space. We feel like we're well equipped to help you cut to the chase. It's a 2,500 square foot raised floor facility that's a mock data center with all the security controls in place, and we can help you do that. That's it for the commercial. I think that was about 5 minutes, so thank you for allowing me to do that. So let's talk about being on the board of directors. Security is an interesting conversation these days at the board level. Does anyone know why? I won't make you speak into the mic, but if you could just maybe shout it out. What has changed in recent history that has really given rise to this topic in the boardroom? What would you say?
Liability.
Headlines? Liability? What else?
Laws.
Laws?
Target.
Say it again.
Target.
Target. So I believe that if you fast forward 10 or 15 years from now and you look back along the path that we've been on, we're going to see mile markers kind of stick out that are interesting. I think Target is a mile marker. I think Sony is a mile marker. Right? There's a lot of noise, a lot of interesting news, but I think those events were unique for different reasons. But specifically with Target, so many Americans were personally impacted by that. Okay, before maybe it was just noise, it was an interesting article, but man, that impacted me, right? The CEO was fired, the CIO was fired, the CISO was fired. They cleaned house. So they quickly became sort of one of those interesting mile markers that you'll look at. And whether you're a retailer or not, security then suddenly came up to the board level because the board now wants to have a conversation about risk. What we have found over the last couple of years is that most IT departments, security departments, even C-levels, CISO, CIO, they quickly found themselves not really equipped to walk into the boardroom and have that conversation. So then how do you do that? how do you go into those meetings and talk to a bunch of executives, business people who may not even understand technology and begin to talk about this conversation? So one of the first questions you're going to get is, well, can this happen to us? Said a different way, are we secure? Right? And we all know, from being in the industry, that you have to answer that question very carefully at that level. Okay, one of the other questions that you may get is, well, okay, so we've got all these projects that we're doing. Where is all this stuff going? Where is this leading? What's the ideal state? What's perfect? What are we shooting for? Right? I can go optimize my storage environment. I can optimize or virtualize my server environment. But when do I know that I'm there with security? When are we finished? Right? And I can see the smiles in the room. You guys know the answer to that question, but think like a board person. That's the way they're programmed to think. When are we finished? So this is a starting point. It's, well, let's talk about what a fully optimized security program looks like. What are the attributes? What are some of the features of an optimized program? So then we get into this notion of shift. It's a shift of the metrics and a shift of mindset. So what we're going to talk about next is really some legacy mindsets and then the future mindsets and how to articulate that potentially at the executive level. So this is kind of a startling slide. You think about breach prevention being dead. You think about the notion that we all know about, we all talk about, you guys likely in this room, multiple presentations, you've talked about this as a thought process. The fact that you can't protect and defend your way out of every single situation. So this is an interesting starting point because the board probably has a mindset like this. Now, if I had a whiteboard here, big enough for everyone to see what I was doing on the whiteboard, this is what you would see. I whiteboard this for clients all the time, and I asked our marketing department to turn the whiteboard into something that you could actually see on a slide. So work with me with the visual. But just imagine, with your board of directors hat on, you know that the firm has invested a lot of money in security stuff, the vertical axis, technical term, stuff, over some length of time. A decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, right? So we've bought technology, we've hired staff, we've invested in policies and procedures, stuff, over some length of time. And we've invested in what we would call in this room some of the traditional controls. So some examples might be firewall, IPS, AV, SIM, traditional security controls, the basic blocking and tackling. I have stuff, I've been buying stuff over some length of time, but the event still happened. I like to call this boom, right? The boom event still happened. So pretend that you're the CFO, right? You've got this security line item on your budget sheet, and you're continuing to invest. CFOs are programmed to see a return on investment. They make an investment, they want to see a return on the investment. Security is very, very hard to do that. Why? Well, it's really hard to quantify the dollar value associated with an event that never happened. That's the core problem. So I've been throwing money in a hole for 2 decades and something still went boom. So why is that? This is the legacy mindset. If I buy more stuff, certainly it will help keep the bad guys out. It'll never happen to me. I won't have a security incident. I won't have a data breach. I won't, quote, wind up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Okay? So let's talk about the shift that's happening in the mindset. So what's going on? What do we want to think about? So if you follow the Mandiant report, 2 reports ago, they said that the adversary is usually on the network in the enterprise an average of 229 days before the organization realizes that they have a problem. So the adversary has unfettered access inside of the network for a long time before they actually realize that they've had an incident. If you look at the latest report, they've downgraded the number from 229 days to 205 days. So you must think, well, we're getting better. Is it really better? Or is it a different data set with different numbers that they're calculating? If you follow Ponemon, so the Ponemon Institute publishes some survey data. They have some trending information. They've been going at it now for probably a decade, so they actually have some neat statistics about trends. But Ponemon would say that the number is rising, and it's actually 256 days. Likewise, if you follow that same reporting, it takes an average of 32 days to actually resolve the incident. So I had an incident. The adversary was on the network undetected for, let's call it, over 200 days, just to sort of satisfy everyone in the room. And then once I knew I had a problem, it took me over a month to resolve it. And what's interesting is that if the adversary is an insider, you can actually double that number at 64 days that it takes to fix the problem or resolve, remediate, and that kind of thing. The reason for this, obviously, I think it's obvious, is that the way the organization is architected from a security program perspective is that we've shored up our perimeter defenses. It's a little easier to try to patch something at the perimeter versus deal with some of the problems on the inside. So that's why it takes a little longer. The folks in this room could potentially challenge me right now to say, well, wait a minute. If the adversary is external and they're stealing credentials of an inside user, they're essentially becoming an insider. So if you look at the data breaches that are happening, the adversary is external, but they're an insider for 256 days, according to Ponemon, which means they look like they're supposed to be there, right? So the adversary is using your version of normal against you to stay low, under the radar, and undetected. So that's what's going on. So the board doesn't understand this. The board of directors, they don't get this. The executives, the CFO, they know they've been buying stuff for a long time. Something went boom, there was an incident. So these are the new metrics. So when we talk about shift happening, you have to shift the metrics. Because in the old days, I think the old days, if something went boom and the board and the executive team had the mindset that the breach would never happen, but it did happen, obviously the CISO is an idiot. So we just have to fire that person and get a new CISO. Okay, so we talk about survival in the boardroom. My recommendation, if you have an opportunity to talk with your executives or to even be on the board agenda, is to talk about this shift that's happening, to let them know that something will go boom, and we have to manage to the new set of metrics. So, if I'm a CISO, if I'm in the security organization, I want to begin to monitor the metrics, and my mission should be to drive these numbers down. So if the adversary is on the network, according to Ponemon, 256 days, what if I could do some things that would drive that number down to 180 days? What if I could do another set of things that would drive that number down to 30 days? What about 3 days? What about 30 minutes? So if I understand the metrics and I can change my strategy, my mindset, my culture to think about how we drive that down and actually interrupt the crime while it's in progress, if you will, and if we can actually interrupt the reconnaissance while it's happening inside of the environment, then I'm actually able to stop the attack before we get to the last step of the kill chain, which is data exfiltration. Because then I had an event, I had someone on the network who was posing as an insider, and I was able to interrupt the crime while it was in progress before they actually took anything. Suddenly, I can get back in front of the board and I can talk about how our focus on the new metrics is working. We had this many incidents. This is where we were able to interrupt the attack while it was in progress. And this is what happened. And we know this is what happened. Therefore, we don't have to say anything to anyone externally to the organization. So that's the change, that's the shift, that's what's happening right now. So let's go back to our whiteboard. So traditional controls on the left side of the line, security breach, dotted line. Then I have this green area. So the green space is where the game is moving. It's the new investment. It's the new opportunity for the organization to actually operationalize what I've been talking about regarding the metrics. So if you were thinking about your program more holistically, and that's an overused term. Some people believe holistic security is that you have firewall and IPS. I would submit that all of that stuff is a traditional control that sort of belongs on one side or in one bucket. We'll show you a visual of what this looks like at the end so you can see it. But I would submit that a holistic security program probably consists of about 6 domains. And the traditional security controls, it's 1/6 of the security program. When I travel around and I think about a lot of our clients, I find that a substantial amount of their investment is to the left side of the line. And they're focused on 1/6 of the problem. So when we start talking about the kinds of things that will go into the green area, we talk about advanced controls and services. Programs that you would put in place under your security program to help you solve this problem. Things like an incident response program, not an incident response plan. There's a difference. A plan is an element of the program. Okay? A program has a plan. A program has technologies, processes, policies, and people. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but what I do find in my travels is that folks are typically woefully understaffed in the area of incident response. It's a part-time job for a lot of people based on the nature of the situation. It kind of determines who they scramble and what they do. I would argue that based on the climate that we live in, there's a need for continuous incident response. Always. All the time. I would look at third-party risk that's tightly coupled with incident response, but there should be a third-party risk program. I think you guys know why. I'm not going to recite the news articles to you and what's going on in that regard, but clearly third-party risk makes a difference. I would also say that we have to understand our version of normal, looking at behavioral analytics and analysis. I have to normalize the environment so that when something abnormal happens that is technically allowed, okay, I can see it happening. I have to focus better on application security, data security. I have to focus on things like encryption. Okay, I have to monitor my databases. I have to look at structured data, unstructured data, access control, and so on and so forth. We're going to kind of build this out. But this is, I believe, the board level conversation so that they understand that there is life after boom, okay? And we have to, as an organization, think about the problem more holistically. So, to recap, this is kind of the summary slide of the shift, but we have to move from a stance of prevent, protect, and defend to more of detect, respond, and neutralize. By the way, you guys are going to have access to all of these slides. We've already emailed the slides, and you should have them on your website today. So let's talk a little bit about industry maturity. What we find is that different industries are in varying states of maturity for different reasons. Security is one of the few things, I believe, in IT that you really can sort of group the conversations by industry. Because of what we've seen in the news, and if you think about some of the timelines, we know that banking and financial services has always been under attack, right? That's where the money is. The bad guys have been trying to rob the bank since the horse and buggy days. Fair? That's where the money is. So an attack on a bank is a bank robbery. So I would argue that that industry is probably the most mature. Doesn't mean that they're risk-free, doesn't mean that they're perfect, doesn't mean they'll never have a breach, okay? But I would argue that that industry is likely the most mature that we would see. Retail has become the new bank because of all the card numbers, all the credit card numbers. So the retail industry has a couple of things working against it, right? A heritage in low profit margins and not being able to make some of the investments in security that they needed to make, and also a very, very distributed model. So the retail industry, they have stores all over the place. You may have a retailer who has 5,000 stores, 10,000 stores. You know, how do you begin to shore all that up? But we know from a couple of years ago, right, that the retailers are scrambling now to go do something about that. So when I talk to a retailer, the question used to be, call it 3 years ago, what are other retailers doing? If you come in and do an assessment, I would like you to benchmark my organization against organizations like me. They don't ask that question anymore because they know they're all bad. What they do, and I mean no offense to anyone in the room, if you work for a retailer, but the question I get is, what are the banks doing? Because the retailers know they're the new bank. So they don't want to get a little bit better based on the retailer across the street. They want to make a giant leap up the maturity ladder because they know they need to go do what the banking industry has been doing for decades. The next one, coming along the path behind retail, remember we have this journey on this highway with these mile markers, is healthcare. So when I call in a healthcare, they're asking me, what are the retailers doing? Because they know they're a couple of years behind retail. We also know that identity theft and actually assuming someone's healthcare identity is a bigger payoff for the adversary than the price of a credit card number. So there's a bigger payoff in healthcare for the bad guy, and they're a little farther down on the maturity ladder. Okay? They don't have the sophisticated security program that the other guys do. So if you're the bad guy, what are you going to do? You're going to go after the low-hanging fruit. I'm going right after healthcare. And if I had room on the slide, you'd see manufacturing because they're behind healthcare. So when you start looking at maturity, that's what we see. There are other industries in here clearly, right? Pharmaceutical is in here. They're probably ahead of retail, behind banking. We could build out the slide. I'm using this for illustration purposes because I think it's relevant to the conversation, especially at the board level. So let's talk about spending. So where are people spending their money? This is what Gartner will say is going to happen between now and 2018. But you'll see that the security industry right now is just under $70 billion globally. You'll see that it's just over $30 billion in North America, which is really sort of what we care about in this room, North America spend. You'll see how that's rising and growing over the years. It's an interesting equation when you think about how much we're spending on the problem. we're gonna go into some detail here. I talked about Ponemon earlier, Ponemon Institute. They have some data around the cost of a breach. I rarely have that conversation because it's open for debate. You know, hey, you don't know me, and how can you tell me how much a breach costs, and how do you quantify brand damage? And I really don't go into that room, especially at the board level. But the numbers are interesting in terms of the number of days that it takes to remediate and to actually fix the problem. This second paragraph here, if you recall, we're spending about $70 billion as an industry on security. Well, World Economic Forum did some analysis. They're just a bunch of CFOs. They're economists. They really don't know that much about security, but they were able to recently quantify the security problem. So what's the impact of the security problem on the global economy? Well, it's about $400 billion in terms of global impact. And again, there are a bunch of economists. They're not security folks. But it's interesting because we're spending $70 billion to solve a $400 billion problem. Would seem like there's some room in there. Here's the other thing that they said. They made a prediction. So take this for what it's worth. But they said that by the year 2020, that $400 billion is going to grow to a $3 trillion global impact on the economy. The reason for that is that innovation is going to have to pull back and pause because of the security problem that it's going to create. So think for a minute, all the innovation we've had over the last 5 years. 5 years, we've accomplished a lot as an industry. You think about cloud and mobile and social and all the stuff that we're able to do. There's an app for that, right? Think 5 years from now. Think about everything that's going to happen over the next 5 years. Imagine. So what they said was that innovation is not going to be a problem, but taking that next step in innovation will become the problem. We're going to have to stop because it's going to be too risky. It's going to be possible, but the risk associated with taking that next step is going to be really a big deal. And that is going to create a $3 trillion impact on the global economy. So that's a big deal. Your board might care about that. I think that's interesting. So Gartner foresees a number of shifts. We're not going to go through these in detail. You'll have the slides. You can think about some of these trends on your own time. But prevention is futile. That's the first one that goes back to one of the opening slides, that prevention is, or data breach prevention is actually dead. The post-signature era that we live in, looking at cloud, looking at big data, all of that stuff is part of the problem. Looking at spending, so where should you be placing your bets? So if you remember one of the first trend slides I had spending globally and for North America. This is what's under that. So you could say, okay, we're going to spend all this money on security. Where are we going to spend it? So you can see lower left corner, DLP, data loss prevention. Well, DLP is going to grow at 17% compounded annually between now and 2018. Well, that's terrific, but it's 17% of a really small market. The DLP market is only about a $300 million market inside of a $70 billion industry. So it's going to grow at 17% year over year. So not a whole lot of spend forecasted there. You look at managed services, 15%. You look at consulting and professional services, implementation also growing. Why? There's a people shortage. There aren't enough security professionals. So Gartner is predicting that they're going to, you guys, the enterprise, the client base, you're going to have to spend more money on outside help to accomplish the goals of the business. And then you see some other areas around product that are also growing. And some of these are broad categories. It's hard to drill in much further here within the scope of what we're doing. So for me, I can usually take the security conversations that I'm having, and I put them in roughly 3 buckets when I'm talking to CISOs and the like. Usually, every conversation leads back to one of 3 things. So we talk about the demands of the business. So if you're a Gartner customer, Gartner will refer to this as the nexus of forces. right? So we have cloud, mobile, big data, social media coming together, this confluence of factors. The business is coming at you, coming at the IT organization, taking you off your game, requiring you to change and shift and churn. We know that that has a security impact. We know that there is a security component of this problem because the security organizations also have to react to that. And then that alone is challenging for any security professional just to react to the project load that's coming at you from the business. That middle piece is the escalating threats. So there's no shortage on new opportunities to attack you, new creative ideas and so forth. If you combine those two things together, the changing demands of the business combined with the escalating threats, you got a real problem on your hands. It's the impossible equation to solve. And then likewise, far right box, there's a shortage of resources. There's negative unemployment in the security industry right now. Any person in this room could leave today. You could resign today, and I'm certain have a job by Monday, right? No shortage of opportunities for employment in our industry. So you combine these three lenses into one problem, and it's a very complex equation to try to go solve. So let's talk about relationships. So we talked about core infrastructure security not exactly being able to live up to the mission that it was destined to do. So let's talk about people and applications. There are two sides of the problem. The first side is something around data sprawl. So we think about you have enterprise data and you have applications. Your data is everywhere now. It used to be just in the four walls of your traditional data center, but now it's in the cloud. Now it's on mobile devices. Maybe somebody put it in their Gmail. Maybe it's on a home PC because somebody likes to work from home on the weekends. Whatever it is, you have data all over the place. In the cloud, maybe use Salesforce.com, this and that. And then you have applications. You used to just have applications inside of your traditional data center, but now you have an app for that, right? You have a web portal for your customers. Whatever it is, you have this interesting combination of data and applications. But don't forget that you don't just have data and applications for your health. You actually have users. So the user landscape has changed. So in the old days, your users were your employees. And most of your employees came into your brick and mortar building and maybe they punched a time card or whatever and they were in your four walls between 8:30 and 5 and you know, that kind of thing. But now we know that your user landscape has changed as well. So you have employees, you have partners, maybe subcontractors doing work for you, and you have customers. Maybe there's some other categories up there, but I think those are the main ones. And those groups of people are actually accessing your data and applications from a variety of locations, right? So there's context. Sometimes they're in the office, sometimes they're at home, sometimes they're traveling for business and so forth. So again, as we move from some of the traditional controls and we start to think about the inside, we have to really understand the relationship that exists between people and our data and applications, because that's where the new fight is. That's the new battlefield. All the other stuff that we've invested in, all that stuff is still completely necessary. Don't fall victim to walking around your home, making sure all your windows are locked, but leaving your front door wide open, right? That's kind of the thing. You need a more holistic approach and strategy. So when we talk about this notion of risk, you have to actually operationalize what we're talking about, which means you can't just buy something and forget about it. You have to operationalize the something, right? You have to apply the control, which means that you have to have policy, you have to have people, process, technology, all coming together operationally to make a difference for you. So when we think about the demands of the business, if you have launched mobility, as an example, did you also launch a mobile device policy, right? Does that relate back to or tied back to your enterprise security program? Same thing with escalating threats. Do you have an incident response program? Do you have people, process, and technology? helping you manage the escalating threats and do the incident response? Do you have the appropriate head count and skills necessary to actually make a difference when you need it? So you guys probably know this. This is a Lockheed model around the intrusion kill chain. Again, if you're a member of the board of director, check your CISSP at the door. We're not doing that today. You're a member of the board. This is actually, I think, a really good illustration of what's going on. We know that the adversary is doing extensive reconnaissance on the environment. They're building a custom weapon, usually delivered via spear phishing attack. Don't click on it, right? You click the link, you click the attachment. There's malware that's embedded in it. They exploit the victim's PC. And then command and control is established back out of the enterprise, and then data exfiltration can begin. So when we talk about interrupting the attack, we have to deal with the kill chain. We can't just protect and defend. We have to break the chain. Okay? So we have to adapt our defenses. Let's think about this from a technology perspective. This is a rudimentary diagram of a traditional security environment that you may have found anywhere, let's say, 10 years ago. Okay? This is what, the board doesn't even know this. This is what probably the CIO understands. So now you're a couple layers below the board. And what we would suggest is that you need to maintain your investment in some amount of stuff, but you may need to add some things like a next generation firewall as an example. You have to add denial of service protection. Maybe there's something around enhanced APT security, so SIM, analytics, forensics, advanced threat protection. Application whitelisting. So we know that's a popular trend as well because the growing number of things on the blacklist is out of control. So something that's more manageable is the list of good things on the whitelist. Enhanced content security. This is where things like data loss protection come in. Database monitoring, two-factor auth. Things like encryption would go in there. Looking at patch and vulnerability management programs, incident response, and of course, security awareness. Making sure that your users know exactly what their role is in this scenario. The interesting thing about board level conversations, it's sort of what we as an industry have always hoped for, right? How many of you have tried to influence enterprise-wide change from your chair, right? It's hard. How many of you have walked into a meeting, we need top-down support? Well, you finally have it because the board is going to make it everybody's problem, not just the CEO. They're going to change the culture of the organization. Every executive in every department is going to be on point for making sure that the organization is doing a good job relative to security. It's the perfect storm. It's what we've been waiting for as an industry. So let's go back to the kill chain. How do you really do what I said before? How do you break the chain? Right? We've heard vendor presentations around breaking the chain. We've talked about it. Maybe we've whiteboarded it. I think we probably all understand the kill chain and what's going on. Sometimes if I'm doing customer stuff, I've got the anatomy of a modern attack and we kind of walk through the kill chain. I'm not gonna spend time there because I'm certain you guys already understand this philosophy. But we have to observe the reconnaissance. We have to detect the weaponization, identify the delivery or the exploit or the command and control, and neutralize data exfiltration. So a lot of times when I do executive briefings and we bring in the executive IT team into our corporate headquarters, we'll do an EBC, and we'll park on this slide for a long time because what we talk through is a way that you guys can do projects, okay, to try to shore up your ability to break the chain. So, just kind of build this out for you completely. If I want to try to observe or detect what's going on early in the cycle, that I may want an inventory of all of my assets. If I don't have an inventory, I can't even begin to protect what I'm supposed to be protecting. And an asset might be a hard asset. It might be a soft asset. It might be an information asset. Doing vulnerability assessments, understanding wireless access control, inspection, controlled access, privileged access, understanding DLP, looking at encryption strategies, looking at all of the things that really matter when you're running a program. If you were to use this as a rudimentary scorecard and you were going to do green, yellow, red on some of these boxes, right, kind of do a self-assessment, you know, kind of take this back and go, well, yeah, I think we're green here, and man, we've never even thought about that. We're red. If you have a bunch of red boxes on this sheet, odds are you can't survive a modern attack. And if you wanted to arrange or structure your projects to kind of line up with the modern threat, and you begin to turn green in one of these stacks, you probably stand a pretty good chance to break the chain before data exfiltration occurs. This is going to help you support the new metrics at the board level and to justify additional projects and funding with your CFO. The board doesn't care about your project load, by the way. They're going to give you 15 minutes and they just want to know, are we at risk? But the CFO is going to write checks based on that link. You get the board to nod that your strategy makes sense. You get the CFO to understand that you need to do these projects in order to break the chain. So, program maturity. We talked about this. My first slide was, what does Nirvana look like? Nirvana looks like optimized security on the far right. So you can often take a look at your organization and think about, well, how mature are we? Okay? Is security even defined? Do I have a CISO? Do I have a formal IT risk management process? Do I have a risk management committee? Do I have processes that are consistent and repeatable and predictable? So you could kind of rate yourself from left to right, knowing that you ultimately want to land on the right side of this chart. And I think this is the last slide. I alluded to this early on in the presentation when I said that many of the clients that I talk with, most of their investment is in the upper left box. So they've made a tremendous investment in core infrastructure security. This is not a completely exhaustive list. What I'm showing you is that we've taken the word security, we've broken it up into 10 domains, 10 programs that we think would create an effective security program, and we've listed a few things, a few attributes of each category just to give you a flavor of what we mean, okay? So, core infrastructure security, firewall, IPS, proxy, email security, DDoS, all that stuff goes there. You might say, man, 80% of my spend is there. Well, what about the other 5 domains? A lot of times I'll talk to a client and they're like, hey, we need to do DLP. Well, why do you need to do DLP? Well, my CFO says we need to do DLP. Okay, great. Do you understand that DLP doesn't actually do anything? Right? DLP will provide visibility into a problem, but if DLP is not combined with encryption and in concert with a more holistic data protection program, and if I'm not considering the endpoint protection and considering mobility and thinking about my structured data inside of my databases, then I really don't have a chance when I'm just doing DLP. That's the data side, okay? Lower left corner, that's the people side. I talked about understanding the relationship that exists between people and technology. So the people side, identity and access management. So federation, privileged access. I have to understand the relationship that a person or a role has with my data and my applications. Applications, far right box, far right corner, lower right corner, database security, secure SDLC, that's software development lifecycle, if I have in-house developers, even if I've taken something like Oracle that's off the shelf and I've completely tricked it out with customizations, maybe my developers introduce vulnerabilities in that process and now Oracle is vulnerable. And when I apply an Oracle patch to a highly customized Oracle environment, that patch may not do anything to help my customization because it's unique to me. Web application security, securing DevOps. So there's a relationship, again, between people and data and applications that exist. Upper right box, we see spend shifting from, over the last 2 or 3 years, core infrastructure security to threat and vulnerability management. The reason for that is obviously the malware problem that we see. We see the need for threat intelligence, security analytics, advanced monitoring. The whole behavioral analytics thing fits there as well. Really understanding what normal looks like in the enterprise and really being able to alert on something that's abnormal. The key problem is that the person or the role may be allowed to do what they're doing, which ultimately is malicious. But if it's an abnormal behavior, you want to know that. So an example that I like to use is that Edward Snowden, right, his job at the NSA was he was the SharePoint administrator. So he had access to everything, every single document, everything. But he was the librarian. He should have had access to everything, and he should have had complete capability to be the librarian relative to their SharePoint environment. But he never should have been able to download documents because the documents were meant for the business, which were the agents, but the business. So that was unusual or abnormal behavior. He had access to do it, but it was abnormal for a SharePoint administrator to download every single document that he had access to and to cart it off-site. So we won't have a political conversation in the room and we won't get into all that here. That's not the point. The point is, that's an example of he had access to do what he was supposed to do, but it was abnormal for his job role. So that's the point. And then the middle box here at the bottom is around program and governance. So you have to have a strategy. You have to have incident response. You have to have good consulting capabilities, audit readiness. The best thing that's happening in our industry right now is that compliance, while it's still a budget driver, it's not the budget driver. I'm seeing customers all over the country not stop with, well, we're compliant, so we must be secure. That's an old mindset. We're seeing that shift. Compliance is still a driver, but it's not the driver. The comforting news is that organizations are pushing through compliance to be more secure. That's really cool. Really, really cool. That's all I have. That was about 40 to 45 minutes, so I think I'm on time here. Really appreciate your attention. We'll take a few questions, I think.
I would like to take a small issue with your statement that visibility does nothing. I would bet even $50 that there's not anyone in this room who would certify they have 100% visibility into their infrastructure, environment, data, or anything else. So obviously it needs to be coupled with things, but visibility in and of itself is an activity that informs, and in my view at least, it's the foundation for everything else.
So I agree with you. Maybe I misspoke. Visibility alone does not enforce. So the point I was attempting to make is that security programs really do two things. You provide visibility and enforcement, right, against some kind of policy. So what happens, what I find is that we have sometimes, I walk in, I have an uneducated customer, they think DLP is going to solve the whole problem. We're going to do this. And it's a conversation around, well, DLP is going to give you terrific visibility about what's going on in terms of things that are leaving your environment. But then you have to couple DLP with something else, like encryption as an example, to enforce the policy that you see being violated through the visibility with DLP. Better answer? Okay, good, good. I don't want to start a fight in the room, all right? I live in Charlotte. I'm out of here. Anybody else? Yep.
Can I get you to stand on that side?
Yep.
It's surprising that you don't hear more about it. There's millions of dollars.
I didn't hear the first thing.
Okay. On your first slide you had with the banking, retail, and healthcare.
Yep.
I'm curious if you know, because there's millions of dollars flowing through this industry, you never hear anything about it, and whether they're just hiding it or whatever, or they're really secure. Casinos.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
U.S. casinos.
Right.
You know,
Right.
Las Vegas, Atlantic City, millions of dollars, but you never hear anything about it. That would be a plus place to attack. But you
Right.
can do all sorts of cool things outside of the
We have security clients in Vegas. They have had problems that we're helping them solve. What I would say is that Vegas is one city, one location, sort of a tight industry. You know, we could list dozens of industries. These are the three that are sort of the most prominent in the news. I was really trying to articulate an example. So again, you're at the board level. If you're working for a healthcare organization and you have an opportunity to speak with an executive, talking about some of these trends within the context of we're next or it's now is I think, relevant. If you're a manufacturer, you might be fourth in line, which means we're really, really next.
Well, that's my question. Where do you think the casinos sit? Because that's a lot of money rolling through there.
I don't have an answer.
Well, one thing I can say, I'm studying one of the FORSYTHE solution partners. Some of our customers, what we've seen in some of the gaming industry, much like the bank industry, they've been worried about security, as he said, since the days that people have forced the budget. The casino industry has been hyper attentive in certain aspects of security for a very long time now. You do not walk through a casino and not be on camera every second you are in that casino. You do not hand money to someone who has to hand money to you that it is not reported. And because that they've actually had they really get the visibility concept. For a lot of gaming and industry like that, they then have to take that and start understanding, well, okay, these IT guys that used to just be the guys keeping our computers running or keeping our networks running, well now, every slot machine you see in a casino is a network computer. And they have a very strict regulatory compliance team that they have to meet, to the point that many of them are running different IT organizations, one for the gaming operation and one for everything else in their IT. They actually get a lot of the picture right now, and there's a lot of security activity.
Yeah, so I think Sonny's exactly right. I mean, you could potentially lump some of the casino controls into more sophistication like banking and finance, right? Because whether it's fraud on the floor, on the casino floor, or something electronically that's happened outside of the environment, they've been under attack since they were in business as well. Anyone else? Right here.
Real quick, one of the elements or the challenges I think with the boardroom is, as you said, shift happens, and we see as new technologies evolve rapidly, like software-defined networking and network function virtualization, and we start seeing a real focus on an area we've never looked at before very much, the east-west data center traffic, for instance. I don't see how that gets to the boardroom, or is that something you have to trust to the CISO based on the fact they've got a charter?
Right.
I was just curious, as you see those kind of fairly major elements that are becoming new because of those statistics of how many days somebody's actually in your environment before you know. And then one of the reasons we have no real good, many times, no good east-west data security.
Yeah, so just to recap the question here in case you didn't hear it in the back, I think it's a very good question. So we think about the changing IT landscape, we think about shift happening, software-defined data center and east-west traffic, microsegmentation coming down the path, and so on. Do you talk to the board about the risk associated with those moves? Fair? Is that the question kind of recapped? I think it probably depends on what the CIO is saying. So, depending on your industry and the way the organization depends on IT, the CIO may or may not be articulating some of those changes in the data center at the board level. If the person is having those conversations at the board, I think it's important to layer in a security aspect of those updates, okay? So if we're going to do some kind of data center consolidation routine and take advantage of software-defined data center technologies and capabilities, that may be a strategic advantage to moving the firm forward, may be a substantial cost savings. There may be something there that's relevant at the board level, which means you may be updating the board. If you are, there's a security component of that. So being kind of arm in arm with the CIO to make sure you're layering in the security aspect of that conversation, I think is valuable. If that conversation isn't happening at the board, then I think you maybe kind of drop back, you have more of a risk conversation with the board, and you have to find a way to provide them a little bit of education along with a bit of a risk dashboard based on what you see from your chair. Does that make sense? Okay. Yep.
One of the challenges I find when presenting to executives is they usually ask for what is the percentage gain if we invest this budget. Basically, like, hey, I mean, we're 25% secure, now it will be 80% secure. Against what? I mean, basically. And the best we can ever, I can ever answer is like, we will be more secure based on the trends we'll be seeing, but I cannot ever answer like, okay, we'll be 80% secure. Like, how would we tackle that trend?
Right. So the question was around budget and the spend. So they're spending money. How do you say that we're more secure as a result of the spend?
Yeah.
Fair? Okay.
Yeah, and a number to it, basically.
And a number. So last year we were 70% secure. This year we're 80% secure. I think that's what you're asking. I don't think you can ever really do that. And the reason for that is that, again, for the CISSPs in the room, we know that there's always risk. You can never eliminate risk. You can never eliminate risk. So because you can never eliminate risk, you can never be 100% secure. So you can't really, because it's squishy, I don't think you can put a number on it. What you can do, I think, is you can begin to map your program into some kind of industry-recognized framework, whether it's NIST or ISO or something like that, so that you can articulate, here's what a complete program looks like. This is our % complete in terms of mapping into something that is more of an industry standard. That's one approach. I'm not saying it's the approach, it's one approach. A different approach could be for you to create a bit of an enterprise risk dashboard where you're able to show at the executive level how many incidents you had in some given amount of time. So we had, 1,000 incidents last week, last month, whatever, and none of them resulted in data exfiltration. To me, if I'm at the board level, that sounds like a win, right? I don't need to know all that technical detail, but man, we were attacked n number of times. Of those attacks, we know that 4 of them got through the traditional defenses. Of those 4, we know for a fact that no data exfiltration happened as a result. That sounds like a win to me. So it's just, but if you don't have the visibility component and you don't know the answer, then you can't begin to even have that conversation. But that's what you have to do. But don't get trapped into return on investment. And are we completely secure now? Don't fall into that hole. Okay? But you are talking to the board.
I'm not a security guy, I'm on the board, and I know that being in business, there's a certain amount of risk that comes as a part of opportunity, and I just need you to secure it. How much money do I need to give you? you gave me 10 boxes, 9 of them are red. Where am I spending my money because I'm only giving you money for 3?
Right.
So how do you decide for the board what's right?
Yeah. So the question was, you have 10 boxes, they're all red. The board's only going to give you money to solve 3 of the boxes. So what do you do? Well, I believe part of your strategy has to be that you have a roadmap with a prioritized list of projects or activities that are going to provide the organization with as much bang for the buck as they're willing to spend. So if you can do that, then you can allow the business to make the decision. If you're a CISSP in the room, raise your hand. Who owns risk? The business. The IT department is the custodian, right? Let's go back to the common knowledge that we know about. So all you can do is inform to say we need to do these 10 things. This is a prioritized list, 1 to 10. Let them make the decision. Talk with them about the risk associated with accepting the risk with those other 7 that aren't going to be done, because there are only 3 decisions that you can make, 3 options in a risk-based decision, right? You can accept the risk, which they may do. That's up to them. You can assign the risk, which is you can insure against it. So you can buy cyber insurance to assign the risk, or you can mitigate. And that's where the project load comes from. So they may choose to mitigate 3, assign 1 to an insurance policy, and the other 6 they accept.
There's still ROI in their mind.
Right.
You'll never change that.
There's one over here.
Or they can also discontinue the activities causing the risk.
Say that again.
There's actually 4 risk scenarios. They can also discontinue the activities causing the risk.
Right, so they can stop using the service, right? If it's a legacy application, they can stop, right? I would argue that's part of mitigation. You're mitigating the risk by taking the service offline, discontinuing the service so it's not there anymore. You've taken an action to reduce the risk. Anyone else? I think we're way over time now. Guys, thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent talk, excellent. I think we could go on with questions for quite a while.